Welcome back. Today we are talking with Treena Reilkoff. Treena, great first segment talking about school violence there. Now let's move on to a new topic, work-related suicide. Is
Yeah.
that on the rise? Is that becoming a big problem now?
Well, it's becoming more again another topic that's becoming more talked about. And because different countries are having new legislation and policies and processes about suicide and if they're caused by work or influenced by the work environment, how do we now handle that from an occupational health and safety? So I was in Australia in June for the first ever psychological health and safety conference, which was amazing. But what was interesting was that while we were there and we were talking about workplace bullying and harassment, those are some of the psychosocial factors that contribute in the workplace to an individual's psychological deterioration. So their mental health deteriorates because they're exposed to psychological harm, which causes psychological injury, which might result to suicide. So in Australia, what was interesting in the papers there that I'll just read here what was just released when I was there. It had to do with the courts, the actual coroner's court in Australia. And it had heard that the last December in 2015 to September 2018, workers at the coroner's court were at risk from exposure to traumatic materials, role conflict, high workloads and work demands, poor workplace relationships, and inappropriate workplace behaviors. During this period, many made complaints, allegations of bullying, favoritism. Workers were afraid to speak up, and they were culture of fear, humiliation. They were experiencing anxiety, PTSD. And a 45-year-old female who went on personal leave for 3 months, she got diagnosed with a work-related major depressive disorder, and she took her own life in 2018. So the courts found that the unhealthy workplace was a contributing factor for her suicide. What is interesting that just got released this month in Australia, because I watch around the country, was Australia has updated their occupational health and safety. And Safe Work Australia now has put in their policy and procedure for occupational health and safety that the workplace has to immediately notify Safe Work Australia if there's any work-related suicide, attempted suicide, or any death of an employee.
Hmm. There was one piece about that because I got the article that you just read from, well, because that's what we were originally going to talk about. uh, how do you go about recognizing or reporting that, hey, someone might be having a tough time, and to prevent this? Because I've talked to other people on the show, and suicide has come up, and there are triggers. But sometimes, if you recognize a trigger, people don't say anything because, on one hand, you're not allowed to bring this kind of stuff up and approach someone about their personal life or things like that, you know. But on the other hand, it could lead to something terrible, like them, in this case, taking their own life. How do you go about identifying some of these things? Because sometimes you can't, people feel like they can't do anything until it actually happens.
Yeah, no, it's a scary subject, right? And the word suicide brings fear to people.
Hmm.
So I know, like here in Canada, a lot of organizations, companies, government, they have regular training, yearly or bi-yearly training for suicide intervention and just recognizing what are some symptoms or signs. And because there is no checky box exactly, it comes down to whether it's a youth or an adult, a change in behavior that you noticed that's out of the norm. And then if you're friends with them or coworkers, and you might, sometimes you hear, it's also looking at what are some of the other additional factors that are going on in their life, right? It could be a death of a parent, a child, divorce, separation, bullying, workplace violence. We don't know. But the key is if you notice a change in behavior, to protect confidentiality, to, not feel like you're prying, but checking in. just asking somebody, hey, I noticed some different behaviors about you. I'm just checking in. If you're not close to them, right, you can still have a conversation that you notice something's different. Are you okay? Is there anything I can support you with? If you're a bit closer, it's kind of asking yourself, are you afraid to ask somebody directly? If there's a lot going in their life, a divorce, separation, a parental death, illness, are you okay to actually ask somebody when you see a change in behavior and they're sullen, they're looking depressed, they've, stopped looking after themselves behaviorally, right? They don't shower, they're wearing dirty clothes, their intake of, substances is increasing, they isolate in the home, they used to go out a lot.
Mhm.
You can ask those questions, are you okay? But you can also ask, hey, have you had any thoughts of hurting yourself or suicide? Because when you ask that question directly, you are not giving them the idea to commit suicide.
Really, you always hear that you are.
You are, but you're not. You are not. And having worked in mental health and crisis intervention, when you ask that question and somebody has been thinking about it, it doesn't mean they're suicidal, right? There's a low risk, high risk, moderate risk. But just because you have ideas or the thought does not mean you are actively suicidal and you're going to go commit suicide. This is that point where if you created that rapport and they said, it could be, have you ever thought about not wanting to be around for a while and then maybe coming back? And if they're open to, sharing some more information, you build that rapport to where if you feel comfortable, ask them directly. I've had many a times where I've asked directly and they said, yeah. And then you support them. And I like to, when somebody has been actively suicidal, the thoughts are there, they had a plan, and they share, yeah, I'm having suicidal thoughts. What I like to do is empower them and help them make the informed choice on how they can get help. So it'd be something like, there's a crisis line. Do you feel comfortable calling the crisis line while I sit here and support you? Or do you feel comfortable, if I called the ambulance? Do you have anything on you that might hurt you? Right? You ask these questions. The key is that sometimes what I like to do too, when I've done suicide training in the past, is change the word. We recognize we're all human. We have a heart. We can have a heart attack. What I know for sure is that if you have a stress heart attack, there's no medical test in this world that can tell you you might have a stress heart attack. They can only do medical tests of what your clogged arteries, all those wonderful medical terminologies of what our body does. But if you go to have a stress heart attack, there's no medical test that's going to tell you you might be at risk for a stress heart attack. But it's your heart, and we need our heart. So what do? You go to a specialist. Your doctor, you get referred to a cardiac surgeon. The fittest person can still have a heart attack because you don't know when it's coming. So if you take that lens and you think about our brain and suicide, it's not suicide, it's a brain attack. We don't know when that point in time any of us might have a brain attack. We can do proactive mitigation. We can ask questions. We can make the stigma reduced, break down barriers so that we can have these conversations in safe places, right? If your workplace is a psychologically healthy and safe place, then that's where the conversation about suicide, mental health, how to have the conversation is a regular topic. It's not once a year, check your box, watching the online training, and there's no communication with your peers, with your coworkers, with your boss, with your family, right? We have to integrate it into our everyday work life and our living life.
Well, the workplace, as we've already said, can be really stressful. Employees are under stress from their bosses. The bosses are under stress from their vice presidents. The vice presidents are under stress from, the people they report to. And the president can be under stress from a board of directors. The board is under pressure from someone else. So where do you where does the buck stop? To actually start making a change in the workplace so that it doesn't get to the point where suicide comes into play. Where do you start when everyone could be feeling, you can have a fancy title and you can still have these same thoughts.
Exactly. If I had the magic wand and could implement this into everywhere, it would be when you have the suicide training, you have the risk conversations about mental health, and you don't silo departments and you don't group people based on their job and their status in the department. You have the front line mixed in with the manager, mixed in with the CEO, and you're all having that conversation about how to create psychological health and safety in the workplace, how to have a conversation when you notice some behavioral changes or physical changes in somebody, how to have that check-in. What, as an organization, business, unit, department, could you have that conversation at a team meeting and say, you know what do we want to create as our check-in phrase? How do we want to create a more psychologically safe workplace? What does protection, psychological protection look like? What, as a frontline, do I need my manager to know to help me? What does that middle manager need their supervisor to know? What does the CEO need to let everybody know that it's okay to be vulnerable in mental health? We can all have a brain attack. So why do we create silos and divisions when we're talking about mental health in the workplace or suicide prevention?
Yeah, that's why I thought I'd ask a question, because I often hear stories, we've only got 2 minutes left, that managers worry about the employees, but who's worrying about the managers? Who's taking care of them? We're all on the same, we may have a fancy title, like I said, but we're all on the same playing field when it comes to this.
Yeah. And that's where, again, whether you're frontline, middle management, do you have the courage and does your workplace feel safe that, if you notice your manager, your boss is stressed, somebody high up, that you can go to them and say, hey, I just want to check in with you. I know there's a lot going on in the office. There's been a lot of pressure. I don't want to pry in your life, but there's chat that you're separated. I'm sorry for that. Or your child's really sick, or your wife lost a job, or your dog died, right? We're human and we have to break down that stigma that for some reason, your status means you might be invincible and not prone to potentially having a brain attack.
And on that note, we've come to the end of our second segment, talking about work-related suicide with Treena Reilkoff, and we will be right back with one other segment. We're going to talk about psychological health and safety environments. We'll be right back. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.